Ship crashes in Star Wars happen all of the time. For one reason or another, it was actually quite common for a ship full of people to get stranded on a remote world and forced to survive by any means necessary. Traveling through space was treacherous and cruel, not to mention unpredictable. For most groups, this simply meant rationing out food, preparing for rescue, and attempting to repair your ship. For others though, this was perhaps a death sentence. But then there was the third category, those who had no food, no hope, but refused to simply accept death. They would instead lose their minds and began some of the most depraved and sickening practices to ensure their own survival and that of their children. That is how the story of the children of Dagobah begins. So, steel yourself, acolytes, because today we will enter one of the most terrifying holocrons that we have. The story of the children of Dagobah begins in the year 40 BBY, when a ship carrying a Republic survey team crash-landed on Dagobah. The swamp world was pretty deadly to anyone who wasn't a trained Force sensitive. As we know, the planet was full of monsters, those that lurk in the muddy waters, creatures that howl in the night from the darkness of the wood, predatory insects, disease, and of course, a heavy presence of the dark side. It is an unfriendly world indeed, and the survey team would each die one by one from various causes after crash landing there. A few of them by the carnivorous plants, but most of them by fever. Originally, they had been an exploratory group for the beginnings of a new republic, the Mappers of Stars, but that was all so long ago now. The children of this survey team had developed an immunity to this fever though, and so managed to survive the plague that would take their parents. But things would soon take a worse turn. The adults had run out of food, and the people had no idea how to forage. Besides, it wasn't as though Dagobah was exactly rich in sustenance. Now starving and completely out of options, the jungle took their minds, and the adults began to feed their children with the flesh of their dead companions. Each time one of their number died of the illness or of starvation, the adults would simply cook them up and feed them to their children. Very soon, they ran out of the dead though, and the adults began to feed the children from their own flesh until they too died. The children began to view this as a normal process, and thus began a cannibalistic society in order to survive the harsh world. The oldest of them, a boy named Gout, had only been 7 years old by the time that the last adult died. From that point forward, the children began to scour the jungle in search of any food. But of course, when one of them died, the feast would begin. They wouldn't be rediscovered actually until the year 1 ABY, when a group of smugglers landed on Dagobah in order to hide from the Empire. Among their group was an individual by the name of Plati Okife, the leader of the smugglers, her aide Truat, and most notably, 2 other kids by the name of Tash and Zach, as well as their uncle, Mammon Hool. They had been on the run from the Empire ever since they survived the destruction of Alderaan, and were attempting to uncover the secrets of the Lost Jedi. As present, they were being chased down by Boba Fett, as the Imperials had deemed them a threat as they were pursuing surviving Jedi. But that was when this group too got stuck in the mud. Upon seeing the children there though, the group was terrified. They could not tell whether they were human or not. They were now gaunt and skinny to the point of being skeletal. The children were missing many teeth, with wiry hair and skin that seemed to stretch over their skulls. The group's leader pulled her blaster and shot one of the children, but Mammon Hool told her to hold her fire, as they were actually attempting to help them. Gout and the children of Dagobah took the group to their camp, which they called the shelter. The children then offered whatever hospitality that they could muster, including a thin stew made of strips of meat. Unbeknownst to the group though, they were eating the body of Gout's companion, the very one that their leader had shot in the swamp just moments earlier. As the 2 kids and their uncle learned more about the children, it turned out that they were terrified of a tiny green creature that lived somewhere deep within the swamp. The group called it the Imp. Clearly, it seems that they have encountered the exiled Yoda at one point, and for some reason or another, became deathly afraid of him. For several days, the group had noticed nothing was wrong, as the smugglers were working on digging their ship out of the swamp, when one of them revealed that they were being hunted by the infamous bounty hunter Boba Fett, who had followed them to the world. The smugglers realized that there was no way to stop Boba, and so they too decided to hunt him down. Because of this, the smugglers broke into smaller groups. But the children is not the only thing dangerous on Dagobah. In the swamp, they were attacked by what is known as knobby white spiders. These were giant land speeder-sized arachnid creatures native to Dagobah. In the fight, Truett received a head wound and had to be returned to the shelter by the children. Truitt was left alone with the children there, while the other smugglers continued to hunt for Boba. When they returned though, they found the children had amputated his arm, claiming that it had been poisoned by the spiders and endangered the rest of his body. But it would be later when they would all learn the truth. Something terrible was in the stew, a ring that had belonged to their smuggler companion. But the children were not done. They also began to amputate his leg by the time that the rest of the group returned to the camp. It seems that in their desperation that they had gone from tasting the dead to eating a man alive piece by piece. When Zach attempted to reveal it to the others, the leader, Galt, captured him and locked him up in a cage alongside Boba. Boba, who had also gotten captured by the children of Dagobah at some point earlier miraculously, showing how the children had mastered the jungle. Zach and Boba managed to escape their cage though, and Zach led the children on a chase through the swamp, one which ended up by the dark side cave near Yoda's home. Zach, of course, had no idea what the place was, but he did end up escaping and would trap several children in the cave. The cave then began to torture the group with visions of their past, showing them their parents who had nourished them with their own flesh. Galt and the rest of the children of Dagobah realized that what they had become was wrong and sick, as the dark side itself began to torment them with their atrocities, the horror of what they had become. Displeased, Boba Fett still decided to take in one of the group named Zach for his large bounty, but the boy was later rescued by his sister and the smuggling team. The two kids and their uncle would later visit with Yoda, who revealed them to be Force sensitive, and Yoda would actually give them wisdom before sending them on their way. The group, however, took a great amount of pity on the children who had been forced to live like this for so long, and as a result, he rounded them all up and took them with him on his ship, delivering the group to the Rebel Alliance. The smugglers entrusted the rebels with the task of rehabilitating the children and introducing them back into galactic society. Eventually, the group would later go on to train at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Praxium for a few years, before going on to become anthropologists. Unfortunately though, we don't actually have a lot of information on what happened to the children of Dagobah, as they're really not heard of in the lore following this story. This version of the story is abridged from the 12th book of the Galaxy of Fear series, labeled The Hunger. As a side note, and some smaller details about the story, specifically towards the end, may not be entirely accurate. This is because this story is actually extremely difficult to find. In the research for this video, we were unable to secure an actual copy of the book, since no PDF or complete synopsis exists anywhere online, and the book itself is very hard to come by. As such, we had to piece together the events of this story through several character bios and still managed to obtain what we believe is the entirety of the story, although some information is incomplete right now. There are some stories out there that are so deranged that even Star Wars wants to bury them. But the story goes to show us the effects that the dark side can have on the minds of the desperate, especially those who are not Force sensitive. We have to remember that Dagobah is a place steeped with the dark side of the Force. And this is an example of insanity, and how it took the minds of even a group of young children. At the time of this Holocron's recording, our world's Halloween is just around the corner, and we plan to release a lot more horrific tales about the darkest aspects of the Star Wars galaxy. So, if you'd like to see more of that, smash that subscribe button. As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the archives and the channel here today, and may the Force be with you.